for the first time ever, you'll be participating in a roleplay game. With excitement, you run out and instantly start reading the player's handbook. After a few days of pondering your class, you approach your DM with your ideas. He squats down and looks you square in the eyes and says,
"You're a wizard, Harry."
Then reaches underneath his desk and pulls out an enormous stack of books. First, he says, you'll need to pick your cantrips. Then you'll need to pick your first level spells from this list, and this list, and this list. And he continues to pull out core books, optional books, DLC, and expansions. And as you start to flip through the list of spells, you see that it is nearly endless. How many of these will you have to read? And your eyes grow large as you finally realize what you've gotten yourself into. And there are only two options. Cut your losses and flee now, or prepare for one rough and intense mental stretching. What do you do? Good morning, everybody. I am Brewmaster Malcolm Bertley, coming to you all the way from sunny San Francisco with another video, today's topic of which is on the blackboard. Why is it that it feels like the magic system in D&D is just so incredibly dry?
God, I'm so thirsty.
And I actually don't harbor any ill will towards Wizards of the Coast for what they have produced. I think that what they've done is quite good. It's a phenomenal job, but it is still full of flaws, things that I would do a little bit differently. And I know that players feel the effects of these things at the table, but maybe nobody can really vocalize it. So I'm gonna just go ahead and put the words to what makes the magic system so dry. But then we're also going to address how we can fix it. We'll also get into some more professional game design. We're not going to get too much into the science of it, but if you guys would like to see a video more on the more mechanical side of game design and the psychology that goes into game design and what makes games fun and that kind of thing, leave me a comment. Maybe I will consider doing a video on that, or join the Patreon and then you can just vote on which video you want me to do. But without further ado, it basically just slows the game, making bad player behavior worse. And we know those players, the ones who take forever to make a decision to do anything, even if they're playing a fighter.
Let's go already!
And so players like that who want to try their hand at spellcasting often find it to be a drag, as well as the DM and the other players at the game who get impatient waiting for them to take their turn. But I also just feel like a lack of that pizzazz comes from the fact that the magic system doesn't get the heart racing or pumping. Essentially, you just say what you want to happen, and then it happens, if you have the spell slot for it.
This is no bueno, because this relegates the gameplay portion of the spellcasting system to simple bookkeeping, where instead of having a tangible, i.e. dice-related, method to cast spells, you instead mark spell slots off your sheet. This is even less engaging than a recharge ability, as even those are tied to a mechanical die roll to determine if the ability is recharged.
Frankly, for the magic system to be as clunky as it is, to require as much research as it does, because the moment-to-moment gameplay isn't that fun, when you're playing a spellcaster, it feels like the payout that you get for playing a spellcaster is not equal to the amount of effort that it takes to play a spellcaster. So if you're somebody who is basically your average player nowadays, you only get to play D&D when your friends get together because you cancel all the time, and so you basically play once or twice a month, maybe once every couple months for some people, then you're gonna forget the spells, which means you're gonna have to spend 20-30 minutes rereading everything. And you're putting in all of that effort, but then the way that you cast spells is so mundane that it almost doesn't even feel worth it. So from a game design perspective, whatever game system that you run, if it has a magic system, then it is imperative that you make the process of casting the spell itself fun, make it a joy for the players. You basically want mechanics that reach the dopamine centers of the player. It's no different than a video game. Why do people play games? The release of dopamine. And this is not to say that every single system in your game needs to be designed to target the dopamine centers of your players' brains.
Looking at you, Activision.
But you do want to keep that in mind, that if it's a major system, then it needs to be something that is pleasurable and enjoyable in of itself, which I don't feel like the magic system is. And that is my biggest critique of it and its biggest drawback, and what I address in my games, and what I'm going to teach you to address right now. I I have absolutely no problem with the fact that the Magic system has an academic requirement. So if the player is not willing to do at least a little bit of research, then they're in the wrong game and should probably play something else. And that's not to be facetious. It just means that if you want to play D&D, a little bit of research goes into it. So if you're not willing to do that, then perhaps a different game, something like Ironsworn, right, which is an excellent RPG, but much simpler, perhaps that would be more your speed. And though I am talking about the D&D Magic system, the solutions that I provide to address these different things, you can add these to any game and spruce up your Magic system and make it cooler, make it more epic, give it more punch, more bite. And that's what we want to go for. I feel like some of the spell descriptions are pretty wordy. There's more words than there need to be. So this is something you really can't address. But as a DM, I would say just get ahead of this and know your players. If your player is like an astrophysicist, let them play whatever class they want. But it's not mean to acknowledge that a person is not quite so intelligent. And that's not to be mean. It's just to say that people have different aptitudes and you should guide them. Then if they have to play a spellcaster, guide them toward one of the classes that relies on spells known or has less spells. So that way they're engaging with the system that they want to engage with, but it's limited so that they have less information for them to digest.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that you as the GM should attempt to stifle your players' choices, impede them from playing a class they want to play. This is to say, if you know the class your player is choosing will make them miserable, then help steer them towards something better for them. However, just remember, this is simply your job as the DM, and not a license to be a bleeding knob.
Some people, you know that they are highly intelligent, and they just don't want to spend their time reading. And this is the same advice that I would give you for those types of players too. If they're going to be bored by it, then also have them play a spellcaster with limited spell slots, and stay away from classes that prepare from a long spell list, because that's just going to frustrate them and frustrate you and everybody else at the table, because you're all waiting for this one person to pick their spells. This is the biggest problem with the Magic system. I, for the life of me, cannot figure out why every other system in D&D is facilitated by the roll of a d20 except for the casting of spells. I've just been racking my brain, and to this day I have no idea why they've decided to design the game in this fashion. If, for the sake of an analogy, tabletop RPGs were video games, then the dice, that's the controller in D&D. So how in the world can you get a thrill from casting a spell if you're not rolling the dice? A fighter has to swing their sword, but they need to roll a d20 to do that. A rogue wants to pick a lock or pick a pocket, they need to roll a d20 to do that. And they kind of got it right with the fact that certain spells require a spell attack roll. But even still, that's not the majority of the spells. And by fundamentally misunderstanding why players play tabletop RPGs, they have, in my opinion, dropped the ball. We play D&D to roll dice. We need to roll dice. We want to roll dice. Why would you have one of the major systems in the game be facilitated without the use of dice? It makes no sense. By removing the chance to roll for your spell, you remove the player's chance to interact with the story. Because every time that a fighter rolls a d20, they know that they have a chance for it to be a nat 1, which is an epic failure, or a nat 20, which is an epic success, and can add greatly to the story when they have an epic success and behead the dragon in one fell swoop because they planned and they rolled a nat 20 executing that plan. But those specific instances are almost exclusively barred away from spellcasting characters who, when they cast a spell at a distance, basically spark a reaction. So essentially, I tell you what spell I want to cast. I want to cast Charm Person. And then the DM gets to roll dice. But how is that fun for the player? If I decide that I want to charm this dude, I want to roll some dice too.
Hey, I want some of that.
It just doesn't feel very fun. And then I know what the outcome is going to be. He's either charmed or he's not. And I'll already probably have a contingency for those two things because it's only two outcomes. It's not that hard to plan for. But that's the gameplay loop. If that's one of the spells that you have, you're a bard, you like to charm people, you're going to be essentially doing that over and over again. I want to charm him, waiting for the dice to roll, and then deciding what you're going to do, one of your two plans. It's repetitive. It's not that fun. And I don't actually, as the player, engage with the act of casting the spell itself. I just simply say I want it to cast, and then it happens. There's no tension or moment of angst where a fighter says, I want to attack with my longsword, and then has to roll the dice and hope that it's not a nat 1. Please don't let it be a nat 1. Roll the dice. There's that little bit of tension, and then when it turns out to be a nat 20, that bit of dopamine release that they get is going to be far and above what a spellcaster is going to experience when they cast a spell. If there's no risk or danger of failure in casting the spell, doing it successfully loses all power.
True, but you already know what all the hard-nosed players will say, don't you? The system needs no fixes. If you were any good, you'd be able to
harness the power of your mind.
If you have strong theater of the mind and you play a spellcaster, then you can flavor that for yourself and really get into the headspace of channeling this arcane energy. But the actual game mechanics, the way that the game plays, doesn't really support that at all. It doesn't feel like you're dealing with anything dangerous, anything powerful. And many spells will just tell you flat out what the outcome will be of the spell, one way or the other way. So there's not very much intrigue or nuance when it comes to casting spells, and it adds to that sandy mouthfeel when you play it. Frankly, I think the spellcasting in D&D is a little bit underwhelming at higher levels. Like, the designers kind of ran out of ideas of what to do with higher level spells, and some of them are even kind of redundant. And in combat encounters, you will find yourself running out of spell slots pretty easily, especially when you start fighting legendary creatures with legendary resistances and layer actions and legendary actions. You'll run out of spell slots pretty quickly. You'll be casting shield a lot, you'll be throwing your fireballs or whatever, counter spelling when you can, and you'll eat up through your spell slots. And if that fight goes beyond 5 rounds of combat, or 6 or 7, and you're just fighting this epic battle, eventually you run out of spell slots, and then you just have to spam cantrips for the rest of the fight. And that is the most frustrating feeling as a spellcaster, to run out of spell slots. You're supposed to be this 10th level, 12th level character, and you have all of this power, but then when you get into a fight with somebody who's actually matching you toe to toe, you just gas out so quickly. And the fact that you, as a spellcaster, don't have a high AC means you get hit a lot, so you do use your reaction a lot. You almost have to have mage armor or shield, or you'll just die as soon as anybody gets close to you. And so for the amount of spells that I have to know, the amount of ins and outs that I have to know, because some of the wording on the spells is very tricky, it's very particular, and the fact that you only get to use them so much is a letdown. Because what often happens is you don't get to use your spells a lot, so you prioritize just 2 or 3 spells, and those will be the ones you use all the time. And then when you need to use one of your other spells, you often forget even that you have them, you forget what they do. And so that becomes a major problem when I'm spending so much time to read the spells, or I am indeed memorizing the spells, and then I only have so many spell slots. I have these 3 to choose from, but I can only do 2 of them, and so it's like I only will choose the one and maybe do the other one sometimes, and then when I finally do want to use the other ones, I never have spell slots for those. It just creates a bad taste in the mouth because it's not a smooth experience. And that's specifically what I'm speaking to. The fact that the spell casting system is clunky. It's just not smooth for the player, and for what it requires the player to do and put up with, it doesn't give back enough because it's not designed with the player's fun in mind. At least it doesn't feel that way. But that's what we're going to be talking about, how to address the magic system with the player's fun in mind. And indeed your own fun if you are the game master. What the hell are spell slots? They seem to be something that is acknowledged in game, but nobody knows what they are. Maybe there is some lore explanation for it, and please tell me in the comments. But if there is one, then it's pretty obscure. Nobody that I've talked to knows. And even on the forums, there seems to be some confusion on what the hell they actually are. It's kind of like HP. Most DMs will just say you guys don't know each other's HP and don't really refer to the HP numbers because you're trying to keep it immersive. But why is it that you have to literally refer to a metagame concept of spell slots when you cast spells? Like, what even is a spell slot? That extra level of like gaminess.
Definition: gaminess
is just that. It's just gaminess. The fighter just has a sword and they just swing a sword. There is no extra layer of disbelief that has to be passed. So spell slots. What is this metagame word, and why is it that the characters in the game know what they are, but it's never really talked about? It's like a metagame concept of having spell slots. And it's tied not to anything related in world. It's tied to literally your character level, which again, the characters in game would have no real concept of what level they are. They're just people in a world. So how then should they have a concept of spell slots? It just doesn't make sense. And so that separation of disbelief of having to ignore the fact that basically that's just a video game mechanic that they put in there just because they wanted to balance out how much magic you could cast, but then they didn't really provide any lore reason for it to be that way, which just makes me feel a little bit lazy. And I don't know why they chose to design it that way. But sidebar, let's say that the spell slot concept is not actually so bad. I think that it just needs a little bit of tweak in the mindset. It's better, instead of thinking of spell slots, think of the spell slots as an abstract representation of the spellcaster's remaining stamina. And that every time that a spell slot is cast, it's not that they're burning through a spell slot, it's that they are becoming more fatigued and running out of stamina to continue to cast more spells. Of course, the spells that are higher level have less spell slots, or they have less stamina to cast such powerful magic, as opposed to lower magic, which is easier to cast and drains less stamina. And that's the way that I would theorize it, to make it easier as a DM to conceptualize and make it easier as a player to conceptualize and even to role play what's happening to your character. Once you start looking at spell slots as stamina, then you start to hear players say things like,
I'm so tired.
but they won't say I'm running out of spells. They'll just say, man, I'm sweating now. Beads of sweat are popping off my head. I'm exerting myself. And that's their way of saying that they're running out of spell slots. But it's more organic to the game and is much more immersive and feels much better at the table. But we'll come back to this point later. So now that we see what the problems are, let's talk more directly about how we would address it. So the very first thing, which is what I touched on before, a general piece of advice, just know your players. Players who are not going to be thrilled by or indeed can't handle the magic system, just steer them away, get out ahead of it, and you'll save yourself some headache. Also, know that whatever rules you make for the players, you as the DM will also have more fun if you play by the same rules for your own spellcasters. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody, any GM, how to run their game. What you do on your side of the screen is, frankly, your business. But I encourage this method of play simply because when you homebrew systems and you have your players play them, when you play them too as the GM, you get to see how effective they are, and simply you get to group test it with your characters when you use the same systems. And you'll also quickly see what feels fair and what doesn't when you're playing the system yourself. My players unanimously love my magic system because it gives them moment-to-moment gameplay that reflects what's happening with their character. And that's what the next video will be on, how I specifically address these things using these principles that I'm going to talk about today. So put on that apron and let's get into the lab. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. Gracias por mirar. I have nothing but gratitude for you, because when you give our channel a chance, it builds our community and gives us an opportunity to learn together to be better tabletop RPG players, which is, por supuesto, what this channel is all about. Como agradecimiento, vengo con regalos. Your support is much more meaningful than you could ever know, and so these gifts are for you. At the end of every single video, I will give away free content for those who've watched all the way through. The content will often be themed after the video and can include anything from stat blocks for NPCs, monsters and villains, lore, magic items, random charts and roll tables, feats, items, spells, class features, abilities, and God knows what other homebrew. So make sure you check back every single episode to see what's new. If you want to support our show and help us increase our production value as well as the rate that we produce content, then please consider joining our Patreon. The link is in the description below, beneath the like button, but above the subscribe button. And again, thank you so much for watching. Gracias por escuchar, and I'll see you in the next one.